you first start train with a sword? How old were you?
I was probably around 14. This is going to be kind of strange, but a Hawaiian friend of mine by the name of Nick Kalanawani Makayamung
Mm-hmm.
got into sword fighting with a local group and asked me to come along. I met a guy there by the name of Greg Hinchcliffe, and he taught me for probably 15 years, and then I moved off on my own.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What's the name of your school?
So I was originally part of a group called the Loyal Order of the Sword. Then I moved more into what we call Hema,
Mm-hmm.
which is historical European martial arts, where we actually look at some of the turn on Facebook there. We look at some of the sources. So I created my own school along with John Patterson,
Mm-hmm.
and that's called the Phoenix Society of Historical Swordsmanship, and it's one of the larger HEMA schools in the United States. I'm a part of a movement called the Hema, which stands for Historical European Martial Arts. And what we do is we take sources from as far back as you want to go, and then try to reconstruct those arts. And the more sources, the better it is. Some of our systems, such as 17th century rapier, we have a lot of literature, and we have lots of competitive masters, so we can look at these guys and then try to recreate their fighting. And we have a pretty strong idea of what it looks like because we have so much material. I wrote the Polish Saber book, and how I did that was we don't have as many sources for that. 17th century Polish Saber was a known thing. We have firsthand accounts, but we don't really have any treatises. And then those that we do have are from the wrong century. Still, taking it all together, we can try to do a reconstruction. And that's what HEMA is all about, is we're trying to reconstruct the lost art. On the side, we do other things, though, to sort of validate what we're doing, which includes tournaments, right? We do tournaments.
Yes.
We do, we have clubs, we have drills, we do all that kind of stuff to try to think, can we make this stuff work? Now, we understand there's artificialities involved because we don't want to get hurt, and we have to use not sharp swords when we fight one another. But we're getting a pretty good idea. And just the past 10 years, we've seen the movement explode in the United States, Europe, even in Asia. It's going everywhere. And as it's growing, we have more eyes, and therefore we have more people pulling in resources. One of the really big things is Terminello found a lost book, for example. This guy called Gigani in the 17th century wrote 2 books. We only had the one. We thought the second was lost, which is not unusual to have lost materials. He found it, and that's just one success story in our movement. Mm-hmm. So HEMA is kind of what I'm involved in, and that may help explain kind of the interview coming up. That what makes us different is most martial artists are trying to find perfection, right? From master to student, master to student. We're not quite doing that. We're trying to look at how did they used to do it, and then how do we think it should be interpreted.
Mm-hmm. What kind of weapons do you work?
A lot. Our primary ones are Polish Saber, Italian rapier, mm-hmm. and then Longsword, both the Fiore's Italian tradition and then the KDF German tradition under Kyle.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Why did you pick up a sword?
I never fit in any particular sport or activity. And when I was introduced to sword fighting for the first time, I liked it quite a bit. It was an individualized activity. It wasn't team-based. It's all based on, what I could do. And I just kind of liked it. I think, everybody thinks swords are cool, right? So that's a big reason behind it. And from then on, I've been working with it for years now. I had a lot more hair at the time.
How do you think? What is the basis on fencing?
So for us, I would say the basis is measure and tempo. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get the answer from a lot of people. If you know your distance, you can fence very well. And if you know when to attack, you can fence very well. Almost any weapon. And people who understand measure and tempo, once we give them basic techniques in almost any system, they tend to pick it up very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Is psychology important in sword training?
Yes. Psychology is important because if you're too timid mm-hmm. and always on defense, you'll get attacked so often that eventually the opponent gets you. Mm-hmm. If you're too aggressive and you're reckless, then you'll double more often than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping a cool head, but also being aggressive at the same time without going too far in either direction is very important, and that takes time. I find in our particular club, we do a lot of sparring. And once you get to sparring over and over and over again, you get used to essentially a simulated fight.
Mm-hmm.
And this helps people's psychology figure it out. If you drill without ever actually, sparring against somebody who's not cooperating, once you get into the actual sparring situation, you can get into a panic.
Mm-hmm.
For our guys, they spar so often, they tend to be just fine.
How do you think why so many people today desire learn fencing?
Oh, well, I only know from the historical European martial arts perspective and
Mm-hmm.
why we're growing. I think people have always wanted to do what we're doing. Just it hasn't been available. It was either wrapped up in historical reenactment or it was very isolated. But we're starting to get more organized now. We have actual companies that recognize us. Recently, Jake Norwood and Lee Smith were on ESPN for a finals match. So we're getting more worldwide attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a lot of things coming together at once. Also, social media has helped tremendously. And look at us talking to each other. You're in Ukraine and I'm in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
10, 15 years ago, this was a lot harder to do.
Do you have your own methodology of teaching fencing? How does it look?
I do. It starts off with I generally teach the basics, and then from there start refining. So I can run someone through the basics in a day. It doesn't take very long. They get a shotgun of it, spread of everything, and then we start refining on specific techniques. And what I find is that our club is, one of the larger ones. That's a cat.
Yes.
Cut. Ours is one of the larger ones, but it's still only 20 people showing up at the most at a day. So we can do individualized training. And the way I run my club is we have a lot of instructors and we encourage people to become instructors.
Mm-hmm.
And that way people can get the individualized training that they need. I think if you try to do it cookie cutter style, you won't get everybody. And you have to understand that not everybody's going to be able to fence like everybody else. So my tall, broad guys are not going to fight the same way that I do, and they're not going to fight the same way as my very short and light people. So you have to adapt and adjust. The concepts remain the same, but the techniques and the execution has to change. And that's why individualized training, when you can do it, is way better than giant classes. Not that I don't mind doing classes; I do them all the time. But you get much more from me if it's one-on-one, or I watch a class and then I give people individualized feedback.
How much time does a person need to become a master?
Well, the word master
Mm-hmm.
is interesting because in the Hema community we get very nervous about the word. But if you look at the word master as teacher, it depends on the student. I've had some as soon as 2 years because they were already athletically gifted, were able to read the source material, take our certification test, and pass it, and they're very, very good in a short amount of time. Others take much longer, and true mastery, like really understand the source material, probably takes just years. So you're probably always working on it. And I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I do a lot of things. But Fiore is one I spend a long time looking at. I've looked at it for years, and I still find stuff in there. It's not a very big book. It's a small manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're talking about like competent enough to teach and competent enough to fight, 2 years if you're athletic, I think is reasonable. If you want to be like a master, you really know your stuff. That is an ongoing thing, and you have to continually sort of approach it and produce content to so you can show others that you know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So very, very touchy subject to talk on there because we get nervous about that word master. But I hope that helps.
What is a perfect logical model of sword fighting?
Perfect logical model. Well, it's because we're source based. We're based on sources. It depends on what source you're looking at. So, an example: a 17th century Italian rapier source says, "Oh, well, the perfect fight is the opponent creates an opening, a temple. I take it, and I stab him. At the same time, he cannot stab me. It's a single time action, and ta-da, I win. Mm-hmm. That is a perfect fight." But if we go to Fiore, who is from the he wrote his manuscript around the early 1400s. His is different. A lot of his stuff is counters where, example, you're in Boar's Tooth, which is a guard where your sword's off to the side. Someone throws a strike at you. I move my foot off the line. I deflect it and I cut him. That's 1-2, right? 2 tempo. And he would say that's a perfect fight. And then you talk to a German, like, no, because you're chasing the sword. You should seize the vor and maybe do a Zornhack, right? Mm-hmm. So every source is a little different on what is a perfect fight. If you want to read something very amusing, a guy called George Silver was an Englishman who was not very fond of the Italian rapier and other foreign systems. And he said, all their teaching is false, and I'm going to show you the right way to fight. And he sort of shows you historically that even back then they were arguing over what is that perfect technical fight. Mm-hmm. So my answer to you is depends on the source.
What is sword for you?
Well, it's been a part of my life so many years now, I don't think about it, which is kind of weird. I don't have a romantic view towards it that I think some others do, because it's not fresh for me. I've been doing something like this for over 20 years. I mean, so it's just a part of my life. I like them a lot. I do like the history and the context behind it now. That's kind of what I'm moving into as I get a little bit older. Still like sparring. My biggest joy, though, is watching others pick it up for the first time, figure it out, and become successful. Mm-hmm. And I'm a history teacher by trade, so I think kind of teaching's in my blood. So I like teaching swordsmanship now. I think that's kind of my role, and I think I do a good job at it.
Can you tell me what is the best tactic to win a fight with a sword?
Again, it depends on the source material and what you're doing. Fiore's longsword view is different than Lichtenauer KDF view, is different than George Silver's view, is different than Spanish rapier view. So it depends on the source. Mm-hmm. Personally, if you said how do I win a fight, it depends on the weapon again. But if it's, let's say, longsword, I have a series of techniques that I know how they work really well. I set up invitations. My opponent will either take that invitation and I perform the technique, mm-hmm. or my opponent doesn't, which means I go hunting them. And then I start looking for the best way to strike them in one quick blow. Rapier, I'm very similar. Mm-hmm. I'll try to gain their blade, and if they let me, I stab them. If they try to overparry, I come to the other side. Works pretty effectively. Polish Saber, we're still figuring it out. I cross-cut like mad and hope that it gets in. So I think when we go back to psychology, the biggest thing to win a fight is, if you are in a sparring match, is to make sure, again, that you are hunting, right? Either you're inviting and you hope that they strike, or you're going to go get them. You don't want to have wasted movement where you're just doing nothing.
Please tell how to use is sword in attack and what it determinate.
Okay, the sword in the attack. Again, it depends on your source. I guess you could break it down into two categories, to use 17th century terms, single tempo or two tempo. Mm-hmm. If you're single tempo, then your attack and your defense are simultaneous. So I thrust at you at the same time, I'm also defending against any counter thrust, right? Or I cut at you and my cut also covers my line so you can't cut me back. Mm-hmm. That's single time. And it's actually very difficult to perform. Historically, we have accounts of double hits all the time because that's hard to do. Double time, two time, mm-hmm. is I move your sword away and then I get you, right? Or I move your sword away and hold it, mm-hmm. and get you. Or I deflect and get you. I find that safer, but not as fast, right? So they have advantages and disadvantages. And so both are forms of attack. Like you wait, you deflect and go, or you set up and go. You know, snipe where I hit somebody and then back out. But that requires like good hand and foot speed. And if you're relying on that, that'll get you into trouble because you'll eventually find someone who's faster.
How much of the basis movements with the sword exist?
Again, it depends on your source. If we look at longsword, for example, mm-hmm. there are basic cuts that come from the predictable directions, right? Left mm-hmm. to right, right to left. Horizontal one, mm-hmm. down, up, and your thrusts. And that's in all systems. How you do those cuts and some of the fine-tuning is different based on your source, but that general spread of cuts is seen in most of them. Mm-hmm. For the thrust, again, you look at a lot of sources, and it's generally you can thrust the quarters, right? Left, right, up, down. Mm-hmm. your sources will kind of tell you more about it. And again, we're source-based, which makes us a little different. So it depends. If you asked about a specific source, we can take a look at that. But if you say, well, what are the basic techniques? There are some universal things I find, but most of those are techniques, not actual like attacks.
How much time a person need to learn to work with a sword?
Depends on who they are. An athletic person, like I said, can become very, very good in as little as 2 years. What took me 20 because we just didn't know what we were doing. We've gotten much better now, and we can get guys really, really good, really, really fast. And some of the sources even tell you this, that it doesn't take long to do. Historically, some of these guys need to learn these techniques within 30 days because they were in a duel. Fiore says none of his stuff is difficult, and he says, don't tell the peasants about it, right? Because you don't want them picking it up. So we know that it doesn't take much time. If someone's physically gifted, it helps. People who are not, or physically uncoordinated, or have issues, they take longer. But if they keep showing up, put the time in, of course they get better.
In your opinion, who is the best example of a skilled sword fighter for you?
There's a lot. To go through the list, there's a big one. Lee Smith is very, very good. I fought him many a time. Jake Norwood is very, very good. I fought him. Kyle Griswold's in my club. He'll be forming his own group soon, and he's phenomenal. He's a beast. My co-pilot is John Patterson, fantastic fighter. Dustin Reagan is a lefty, also very, very good. There's so many. I don't want to leave anybody out. On the European side, Axel Peterson is a big name. Anders Lennart, they're both fantastic fighters. Kyle Ryberg, Dennis Lindquist. I can go on and on and on. There's so many good fighters out there, and as our community grows, you get to see them develop. Like, good example, a guy called Jonathan Ying. He's in South Coast Swords. When he first showed up, he was just like a psychopath. Like, he would just sort of scream and run in. We used to call him No Parachute because he was that brave. Within 2 or 3 years, he quickly refined down, and he eventually actually beat Kyle Griswold, who was a very, believe me, difficult fight in a longsword tournament, and it was fantastic for him. And so he's become a very good fighter in a very short amount of time because he's been very, very dedicated. And these are just some of the many, many, many stories of people who get into this and then develop and grow and get a following. What's kind of neat is Hema is still small. So there's room for everybody to kind of flourish and grow. Other martial arts, if I decided I was going to become like a karate master, good luck, right? There's so many of them. I would just be one amongst thousands. In Hema, there isn't, we're growing, but there's still not many of us. We all know each other, right? Yeah. Which I find fascinating. And so you can see for yourself that you're going to watch fighters who show up as no names and in a couple of years start developing and becoming really, really good.
Okay. And last question, what you would like to say us at the end? Yes.
A couple things. If you are in the United States and you want to get into sword fighting, I would recommend looking at the Hema Alliance. The Hema Alliance is about promoting what we do. If you're in Europe, there are many, many clubs that are picking up Hema, and I said it's a growing culture. It still hasn't even fully defined itself yet what it's going to be. And what I would say is, if you want to get into it, is find a club close to you, find an instructor, and then just start looking at the source material. That's the one cool thing that we have that other martial arts are a little different on. Others are sort of passed down from master to student, and they sort of fine tune and tweak to try to find the best way to do something. We're a little different. We're looking at sources and trying to do it the way that they did it, warts and all. Even if their system has some faults, and they must have faults, otherwise we'd all be doing the same system, right? You can start reading that source material, and you can start getting very good at it. And you can find others who have different opinions or same opinions, and it's interesting that you can form these communities. And I think what's really cool about what we do is, you get to be a part historian and a part sword fighter. It's really, really neat.